In recent years, you may well have heard the term gaslighting. If you have and you don't know or are not sure what it is, this short video is for you. Gaslighting is a particularly obnoxious form of human behaviour, one that isn't limited to psychopaths. In fact, quite young boys and girls have been known to engage in it. It is basically an attempt to mess with your mind, to make you believe something is true when it clearly isn't, to make you believe it isn't true when it clearly is, or in extreme cases to doubt your sanity. If somebody gaslights you, you are being gaslighted, not gaslit. That's for you, Kelly. So where does the term come from? The English playwright Patrick Hamilton wrote a play called Gaslight, 2 words, which premiered on December 5th, 1938 at the Richmond Theatre. In the United States it was known as Angel Street. It was filmed as Gaslight, 1 word, in 1940 and 1944. The actress Angela Lansbury appeared in the 1944 adaptation. At this time she is still alive at 96 and was treading the boards up until 3 years ago. Gaslight is set in the London of 1880. A fairly wealthy dude moves into a big house in the classy Pimlico area with his younger wife. She has suffered from what is euphemistically alluded to nowadays as mental health issues, and he decides to drive her mad. He also has a sinister past unknown to her. Some 20 years earlier he had murdered his aunt who lived in an adjacent house. He had been searching her apartment for a cache of valuable rubies, which he didn't find. On his return to the area with a new identity, he continued the search. The house had remained empty all that time, the local peasants being superstitious. Electric lights were in their infancy at that time, and houses were lit by gas. When he was prowling around the adjacent attic, the gaslight would dim in his own house. Also, his wife would hear noises. Coming from that empty house, dear? You get the idea now. Here are a few examples of gaslighting. This shows agents on horseback at the US southern border trying to stop illegal immigrants entering America. These agents were said to have been whipping these illegal immigrants. In India, they would probably have been shot rather than whipped. It may be that this was a genuine mistake, initially, but long after the truth was widely disseminated, the usual suspects were still claiming the agents were whipping the illegal immigrants, rather than attempting to control their horses. At this point, a possibly genuine mistake becomes an indefensible lie. Like this lie, one of many on the website of Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter indeed. Here is Ben Shapiro of the Daily Wire calling out Hillary Clinton. What she alludes to as Donald Trump calling on foreign adversaries to assist him with his political campaign was actually more of a joke. Did anyone really believe Russia or China would respond positively? That being said, it was a perfectly reasonable request. What harm could it have done? If Russia had Hillary Clinton's illegally deleted emails, furthering true copies to the American government or patriotic American media could have hurt only one person, Hillary Clinton. Or perhaps more than one person, which is why, in spite of her overt criminality, Mrs. Clinton has never faced charges.
When you have a president calling on foreign adversaries for assistance in his political campaigns, which he did in 2016, and which he is doing again, that goes right to the heart of our sovereignty as a nation, to our national security, in a way that is almost unimaginable. I cannot imagine any other president ever even thinking about this.
Could you imagine a president, say, appealing to Chinese donors in the 1996 election and declassifying a bunch of nuclear secrets at the same time? Because you were married to that one. Could you imagine a presidential candidate maybe coordinating with the Ukrainian embassy to dig up dirt on the opponent's campaign? Could you maybe imagine like a presidential candidate coordinating with foreign resources, including a former British spy who is apparently being fed intel from Russian governmental sources about their political opponents, and then, funneling that to your old administration and your buddies in the DOJ and the FBI? Could you imagine anything like that? I seem to be able to imagine something like that because it happened.
Here are two short back-to-back clips of the odious Nancy Pelosi. The first clip shows her attempting to gaslight the nation by blaming Donald Trump for the spread of COVID-19 in the United States, when Trump had actually saved countless lives by curtailing international travel months earlier, an action his Democrat opponents, including Pelosi, have branded racist.
Well, I think with the president's comments today, he recognized the mistakes that he has made by now embracing mask wearing, and the recognition this is not a hoax, it is a pandemic that has gotten worse before it will get better because of his inaction, and in fact, clearly, it is the Trump virus. You should come to Chinatown. Precautions have been taken by our city. We know that there's a concern about tourism traveling all throughout the world, but we think it's very safe to be in Chinatown and hope that others will come.
Race is one of the contemporary issues on which the public is gaslighted most of all, by leftists and by academics of a certain type. This Guardianista claims race doesn't actually exist. This is a surprisingly common claim, and one that is perpetuated by semantic tricks, like talking about the English race. There is no English race. That is a figurative term for white English people. It's a bit like the term mankind, which refers not only to men, but to women, children, babies, and even intersex people, or hermaphrodites as they used to be called. White liberals and academics of a certain type believe or claim to believe race doesn't exist. But what about ordinary people? Here are two Gwailos who lived in China for many years and even married Chinese women. One married two of them. Listen to this anecdote. They are genuinely amazed that in the eyes of the natives, Westerners can never be Chinese.
What would you say is the first thing that basically tells you that as a foreigner there's no way that you're ever going to be Chinese?
Well, I'm going to say that the first thing that you'll notice is your interactions with people.
Okay.
And what I mean is, it's actually, it kind of makes you feel good in the beginning, because people will say, if you say one or two Chinese words, people will say, wow, your Chinese is so awesome, blah, blah, blah. It makes you feel like you're a real smart dude, right?
Gotcha.
It's actually quite condescending after a while. And what I mean is, you can spend a long time here.
Yeah.
And in the beginning you might be flattered, and then later you kind of do understand the culture and the language and things like that, right?
Yeah.
So what I mean is, you'll never be Chinese in their eyes, even if you've been here for 10 or 20 years, you speak the fluent Chinese, like even multiple dialects, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, I actually have a little story. My friend ended up studying and doing his master's degree in Beijing.
Yeah.
And he studied ancient Chinese characters, right?
Right.
To the point where he actually was a adjunct professor in a Chinese university teaching in Chinese.
Right.
By the way, he's from England.
Okay.
And he's teaching Chinese ancient literature, right?
Sure.
Yet he went to buy some corn. They have these grilled corn things, right?
Mm-hmm.
I went to go buy one, and the guy says, wow, your Chinese is really good, but I bet you can't read. And so he reads this sign in front of his thing. It says, like, grilled corn, right?
Right.
And he goes, oh, yeah, well, you can read it, but you probably don't know, you know, you just know the words. You don't know what each character means, you know. Our Chinese culture and history is very deep. And he goes, he sat there for like 5 minutes and broke down the character for corn and told him how all the oracle bones and how it all, like, made sense and stuff. And, like, way asking him questions now that the guy had no idea about. Just because he was so pissed off and frustrated that he spent so long here and actually more fluent in Chinese history than the local people, and still being taught that he's not Chinese. And the last thing that the corn seller said to him said, well, you're not Chinese, so whatever.
Take a gander at these people and ask yourself if race doesn't really exist. Or are we made up of different races of the human species? The rationale behind this ludicrous claim is that if race doesn't exist, it doesn't matter if we, in particular white people, are replaced. Indeed, this is what is happening through mass immigration. Some people call this the Great Replacement. The enemies of Western man, including the enemies within, call this a conspiracy theory. If something is happening, and this is happening, it isn't a theory. The Great Replacement isn't something that affects only whites. Ask any Tibetan. An essential element of gaslighting is to isolate the victim from the truth. In the cyber age, this is difficult, if not impossible. So agencies that engage in this practice have come up with new techniques, including spurious fact-checkers. This is a fact-check that didn't age well, because not only did Hillary Clinton, or more specifically her agents, spy on Donald Trump, it was Clinton who initiated the Russian collusion hoax. Among other things, she paid for the notorious Steele dossier by laundering the payment through the law firm Perkins Coie. It was the Clinton lie machine that was responsible for these myriad lies, which people high up in the FBI went along with, knowing full well it was a tissue of lies. The reason they did so is beyond the scope of this film. Suffice it to say that Trump had intended to scale down America's massive bureaucracy and stop its senseless intervention in foreign wars. If you look at the way things have turned out under the Biden gang, and compare it with Trump's peace drives in both the Middle East and the Korean Peninsula, you'll understand what a tragedy his overthrow was. Before the advent of bogus fact-checkers, there was the 1% rule, a smear tactic that is still much in use. The bottom line is that if you select 1,000, 10,000 people by any criteria, race, religion, nationality, height, sex, profession, or if you simply stick a pin in the globe and select the individual closest to it at the time, 1% of these people have ideas that are unorthodox, weird, or even batshit crazy. A favourite tactic of especially the extreme left is to smear their political opponents, namely anyone to the right of Trotsky, as fascists, racists, Nazis, anti-Semites ad nauseum. Here is Justin Trudeau, the mangina dictator of Canada, using such a tactic in February 2022. He was referring to the protests in Ottawa, the so-called Freedom Convoy. Trudeau saw, or claimed to have seen, a swastika and maybe a Confederate flag or two at the protests. Which means what exactly? Assuming they were not a figment of his imagination.
Hopeful vision for public life isn't a naive dream. It could be a powerful force for change. If Canadians are to trust their government needs to trust Canadians. Those are the words of the Prime Minister in 2015. These people, very often misogynistic, racist, women haters, science deniers, the fringe. Same Prime Minister 6 years later as he fans the flames of an unjustified national emergency. So, Mr. Speaker, when did the Prime Minister lose his way? When did it happen?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Conservative Party members can stand with people who wave swastikas. They can stand with people who wave the Confederate flag. We will choose to stand with Canadians who deserve to be able to get to their jobs, who be able to get their lives back. These illegal protests need to stop, and they will, Mr. Speaker.
What is ironic is that this man fled Canada with his family because he felt he could no longer live in a police state. David Freiheit is a lawyer and a Jew. He has found a new home in Florida. Meanwhile, like many politicians who profess to abhor Nazism, Trudeau puts them to shame with his own authoritarianism. Another technique used to gaslight the public is shadow banning. This is a method of reducing the reach of a YouTube content creator or even a news website. When the party posts a message on social media, including Twitter, or a notification on YouTube, instead of reaching all 10,000 of subscribers, the message will be seen by only a few hundred of them. Some political YouTube channels have hundreds of thousands or even millions of subscribers, so this can be a very effective, sinister way to, if not shut them down, then restrict their influence. During the run-up to the 2020 US election, the major internet companies were able to suppress news of the Hunter Biden laptop scandal. The New York Post broke the story but found itself frozen out of its Twitter account. In addition to that, the deep state, the one we are all supposed to pretend doesn't exist, engaged in a disinformation campaign. 51 intelligence and former intelligence officers, including James Clapper and John Brennan, signed a letter that claimed the revelations had all the hallmarks of a Russian disinformation campaign. This was absurd, but was probably effective because the contents of the laptop was so outrageous it begged a belief that Hunter Biden would take it to a computer repair shop and simply forget about it. The shadow banning, combined with the disinformation campaign, is believed to have shifted millions of votes, and that, combined with the outright fraud uncovered by True the Vote and others, was enough to cost Trump the election. The opposite of shadow banning is astroturfing, which has a much longer history. Astroturfing is a process of duping the public into believing a cause, political or otherwise, is a lot more popular than it really is by using fake accounts, bots, by hiding the identities of sponsors and the like. This is a fair introduction to gaslighting. When it happens in your personal life, it can be devastating. But hopefully, after digesting this, you won't be duped so easily by political bad actors.